Few days ago, I wanted to add an image reveal slider from my freelancing website. But all of the options I found online either looked really bad or just didn't plain work. This was until I found this tutorial by DevEd, and I decided to build my own using React and Tailwind CSS. And the results are awesome. It's completely responsive, meaning it works perfectly on mobile devices. And this is exactly what I'm going to be teaching you today, step by step. Starting a project with React and Tailwind can be a little bit difficult, so I created this boilerplate for you. And you can find the link in the description. So after you clone the repository, open index.tsx and we can get started. Alright, so the image we're gonna use is going to be this one. So I'm just gonna copy the link. So I'm gonna start by creating an image container basically. And let's paste the image here. Now to make the container be on the center of the screen and responsive, we're gonna use some Tailwind CSS to style it. So I'm gonna set the max width to large. I'm gonna set the width to full, and I'm gonna set the margin on the x-axis to auto. This will make it centered. I'm gonna also add some margin to the top, and I'm gonna add some padding for the parent element. This way, when I shrink the screen size, there's still gonna be some white space around it. Okay, now let's duplicate this image, and to be able to compare them, we want them to look different. And to easily do that, we can just use a filter for it. So I'm gonna add a style, filter, and it's gonna be grayscale. This way we can easily compare the colored and the grayscale image. Now the next thing is to make the image be on top of each other. For the image container, I'm gonna set it to relative. And for the grayscale image, I'm gonna make the position absolute. And then use inset 0 to fill up the whole space. And of course, we want to reveal only parts of it. And to do this, we're gonna use something called clip path. And the clip path is gonna be polygon. And the syntax for this is going to be quite weird. I don't actually remember it straight from my head, so I need to try it out a little bit. So it goes something like this. Basically, we're defining the four corners of the polygon. So 0, 0 means this corner right here, or this one. And then let's change this to 50% and see what happens. So this 50%, 100%, it's this corner right here. And now we move it to the 50%. And maybe the other one is this one here. Let's try it out. So by changing this 50% and 50%, we can basically clip the image. And of course, because this value is going to be changing, we're going to have to use state in React for that. So from React, I'm going to import useState. And let's create some const here. So we're gonna have like image reveal fraction and then set image reveal fraction. And we're gonna use fractions for this. So the smallest value is gonna be 0 and the biggest is gonna be 1. And let's start with 0.75. And to use this image reveal fraction inside this one, we're gonna have to change this to the template strings like this. And then instead of saying 50%, we're gonna say image reveal fraction times 100. This way we get the percentages from the fraction. And if I save it, we can see it changes here. Let's try 0.25. Awesome, and 0.5. Okay, so it's basically working. Now we need to add is the actual handler that we can move it with our mouse. And this is going to be a little bit difficult. First, we need to have kind of a container for the handlers. Because we're going to use absolute positions for it, it's going to get a little bit messy unless we're very careful on how we do it. So it's going to be absolute, and the inset on the y-axis is going to be 0. So it's going to be the full width of the image. And then we're going to use styling. So the left position is going to be this one right here. So I'm just going to steal it from here. So now that we have this absolute container here that you can't yet see, we need to create another container. I know it's gonna get quite complicated, but stay with me here. So this one is gonna be relative, so we can position the actual handler relative to this one. So let's just create a line there. So let's say, actually we want it to be full height. Let's add some background color so we can actually see what's going on. There is our line. I'm gonna change the opacity to 50% so we can see the background. So what is going on here is clip path is only here, but we can see the line starts from it and ends here, but we want the line to be on the middle. So what we need to do is add some negative margin on the left side, half the amount that we use for the width. This way it's gonna be always in the center, as you can see. I'm gonna zoom in here so you can see that now it's center. And this is it without the negative left margin and with the negative left margin added. Now it's way too thick. So let's change the width to 0.5, which is 2 pixels, and the negative margin to -1 pixel. All right, and let's change the color to white so it doesn't look so crazy. All right, and now let's create the handler that you can actually touch on and drag. So it's again just going to be a div, and let's add some width and height to it. Let's make it fully round and a white background, and we can see it right here. Okay, let's make it a little bit bigger, maybe 12 would be fine. And we again have the same problem. It's not positioned middle of the line. So again, if the width is 12, we're gonna set negative margin on the left, half the amount, which is 6. So it's gonna be on the center. And now to make it to be on the center of the image, we need to set the position to absolute, and they say top half, like this. But here's a problem, and it's a little bit difficult to see. Basically, the half point of the image is right here, and we can see that the circle is actually below it. So to again center it, we need to add negative margin on the top. So negative margin on the top is going to be the half of the height, like this, and now it's in the middle. Perfect. To make it easier to see, I'm going to add some shadow to it. Maybe a little bit more. Okay, I don't really see it, but I think it's there somewhere. Okay, you can see a little bit of the shadow. All right, perfect. Now that we have the handler there, we just need to create the functionality that you can actually move it. So I'm going to start by creating the simplest low-level function called slide. It's just going to take a position of the slider, and it's going to just set the image reveal fraction. Now let's hook this function into the touch handlers we can get from here. So the way we wanna do this is when you hold your mouse down, it's going to add an event listener to the window, and it's gonna listen to the position of your mouse. And based on that, we can calculate where we should move this. Position listener is not going to be on this button. It's going to be on the window, and this is going to solve a lot of the problems most sliders are going to have. So let's add the event listener here on mouse down and handle mouse down. Now this function doesn't exist yet, so let's create it. Now we don't actually need to capture the event from this, because again, we are not listening to this one. We only wanna activate it when you basically click mouse down. And then we're gonna set window on mouse move, handle mouse move. And let's create this function too. And I think this one, we can actually check the type that this wants to listen to. So it's gonna be mouse event. So event, mouse event. And I'm just going to console log here what we get from this event. So we wanna get the client X value from there. And I'm gonna open the developer console here. And let's see if we get some logs here when I click on this and move my mouse. And yeah, there seems to be the numbers based on the client X position. But here's the problem. After I'm not clicking the mouse anymore, it's still recording this. So what we want to happen is when you release the mouse, then you're going to basically not listen to the events anymore. So when you handle mouse down, we also want to create a new event listener on mouse up, which is going to be handle mouse up. And let's create this function too. And we don't need the function there anymore. When you mouse up, then the window on a mouse move is going to be undefined. All right, and a window on a mouse up is also going to be undefined. I'm gonna refresh the page and let's see if it's working. So when I hold the mouse down, it should record the position. And when I lift the mouse, it's going to stop. All right, that's perfect. Now we have the client position here. So let's use this position for the fraction here. But how are we gonna do it? Again, we use fractions for the position, but here we just have the absolute position. So we need some way to figure out the size of this image and in which position on the screen it is. And there's actually a great way to do this using React. And what we need is something called useRef. And you don't use this so much, but in this use case, it's perfect. So image container is going to be useRef, and it's going to be HTML div element. And this is where TypeScript really helps us out. Using this type here is gonna reveal a lot of information about this. So in our image container right here, we're gonna set the ref to image container. And in our slide, what we can do is, hold on, I don't quite remember what the function is. So image container, current, and get bounding client rectangle. And this gets us a lot of information about this container. Let's just rename it container bounding rect. Using this one, we get a lot of information like the width of the container, the left and right position, which are what we're gonna need to figure out how much should we show it. Let's create a function here to do this. And we're gonna return. Now we need to do some math here. So what we need to do is figure out what is the left position here And what is the position of this one first? So it's gonna be x position minus container bounding rect left. And this is gonna be the amount the mouse is moved from this side. And let's say it moved 10 pixels. Okay, then we're gonna use that value and divide it by the length of this container. And this way we get the fraction. So let's here divide it by container bounding rect width. I'm gonna save it and I'm gonna hook this slide function in here. So instead of logging it, we're gonna slide the amount. So I'm gonna save it and let's see if it works. All right, that's awesome. And if I release the mouse, perfect. But there's few bugs here. Look at this. I can actually go over the image like this. And obviously we don't want this to happen. So let's fix it. So basically, if the X position is less than the left side, then we just wanna return 0. And else, if the X position is more than the right side, then we want to return 1. Otherwise, we want to do the calculation. And let's see if this fixes the bug. Yep, and we can see it stops right there. All right, so there's few more bugs for us to solve. So at first, we can actually select the images like this by pressing Ctrl A. And we don't want this to happen. Another thing is we can drag the image to get this, well, dragging the image. So we can get rid of both of these by using Tailwind CSS. So in the image container, I'm just gonna say select none. And this stops us from selecting the images. And now let's fix dragging the images. And for this one, we need to use pointer events none. Take it from here and paste it on both of the images. And this fixes the dragging images problem. Okay, now it's working fine, but I'm gonna press F12 to go to the DevTools and let's check the mobile view. And when I try to use this on mobile, it doesn't work at all, nothing happens. And this is because we are listening to on mouse down event. And on a mobile, you don't have that. So we need to use different API on the mobile. And what we want to use is on touch move, which basically means when you touch the screen with your mouse and drag. And this is going to be using some different functions, but in the end, we're still going to be using the slide, very generic low-level function. So let's work on that one. So again, on the handler, I'm going to add a new event listener on touch move. And we're going to handle touch move. Okay, a small interruption here. When I was editing this video, I noticed I forgot to add one small style. So in the div, add a new style and set it to touch action none. And what this does is it disables browser specific touch actions. For example, on mobile, if you drag your finger down, it refreshes the page. And if you drag it left, it goes to the previous page. And setting touch action to none disables all of those features. And you need to add this for the handler to work properly. And let's check what type it expects by just hovering over here. So it's going to be touch event HTML div element. But this one, I think is not going to be correct one. Let me put it in here. Yeah, it's going to complain that touch event is not generic. This is because we actually want to use the touch event from React. They have their own touch event. And here we can just say slide event. Oh yeah, event touches item 0 client X. So what is going on here? Of course, in a mobile, you can touch with 2 fingers. So we want to only get the first touch you do and then get the client X position. So I'm going to save it and then try it on the mobile again. And look at this, it works perfectly on mobile. And again, it's responsive, so it completely fills the mobile screen vertically. I mean horizontally. Alright, now that the functionality is done, we can work on the styling more. So let's add a small icon here to make it look more like a handler. So I like to use hero icons for it. And let's look for a kind of a slider icon. Okay, so I'm gonna use the selector icon. So I'm gonna copy the JSX and let's paste it inside the handler right here. All right, we can see something. So of course I'm gonna set the width to maybe 6, maybe 8 is fine. Of course I want to set it to a little bit lighter gray, and then let's center it. So the parent element, I'm gonna set the display to flex and item center and justify center. Now for the icon, let's rotate it 90 degrees. And we need to also add the transform. Okay, there we go. Maybe I make it actually 6 width. I don't want it to be too large. Okay, there we go. I'm just gonna make it even lighter gray color. Maybe like 400. All right, that's perfect. Another thing we can change is the type of cursor we have. So let's change the cursor to be pointer, just like this. All right, now that we have the cursor working fine, let's work on the hover effects. So by default, we want the handler to be completely invisible. And when you hover over the image, it's gonna show at 50%. And when you hover over the handler, we wanna show it completely. So to make it work, we're gonna use something called group hover. So in the image container, I'm gonna add a new class called group. By default, this doesn't do anything by itself, but it allows us to use group hover. So let's set the opacity to 100%. And by default, we want it to be 0. So whenever we hover over the group, which is the image container, it's gonna show at 100%. Awesome. Now for the actual handler, we're gonna set the opacity to 50%. Perfect. And whenever we hover, we wanna set the opacity to 100. Okay, so by default it's 0%, then 50% and 100. Except there's one small problem. On mobile devices, we cannot hover. There is no hovering on mobile. So what we can say that this opacity 0, we only want to show it on screen sizes larger than small. This way on a mobile, the default is always going to be 50% opacity. But when you go on desktop, it's going to be 0. For next, I recommend you to check out my whole playlist of all of my Tailwind tutorials. Or if you're more interested, I also have a playlist of all of my React tutorials, so you can choose which one you wanna focus more. And of course, before you leave a like on this video and subscribe. See you guys next time.